Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. India's second wave is not subsiding. Nepal is suffering from exploding cases and crippling shortages. Japan is debating whether to hold the Olympics or cancel for the second year in a row. Europe is rejecting AstraZeneca to switch to Pfizer shots. America is opening up. Brazil has a pandemic denier president holding a motorcycle rally. What about the home country of the virus? What is China doing? It is busy rubbishing a report. A new report that once again puts the focus back on the origin of the pandemic. A report that shows how Chinese military scientists probe the use of coronaviruses as a bioweapon. The revelations are serious, but they're not surprising. The more China tries to suppress the lab theory, the more it re-emerges. There is no conclusive proof that the Wuhan virus emerged from a laboratory. But there's no proof that it did not. What is clear and documented is the fact that China has, for years, explored the use of such viruses as weapons. And the same China continues to hide the origin of the pandemic. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you what the new report says and how the world is reacting. Also on the show, clashes in Jerusalem have intensified today. Local press predicts a third intifada or uprising. The US pulls up Israel for the crackdown. We'll tell you what triggered it and where it's heading. The World Health Organization has made another irresponsible statement that could lead to vaccine hesitancy. This time it's about India. We'll get you a report. In France, another open letter written by military officials has emerged. It warns President Macron about the survival of the country in the face of rising radicalism. And the United States is the global capital of shootings, it seems. 2 more cases in the last 2 days, one from a birthday party. We'll tell you what happened. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Khaleda Zia, the former Bangladeshi Prime Minister, has been denied permission to travel abroad for post-COVID treatment. The 76-year-old, who is serving a 17-year jail term on charges of embezzling foreign donations, had her plea rejected on the grounds that there was no provision for travel abroad for treatment for a jailed convict. In the latest stabbing incident in New Zealand, 4 people have been stabbed, 3 of whom are in a critical condition. The attacker was arrested after being tackled by bystanders. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said the motivation for the attack had not been established, but police didn't have any evidence to suggest it was domestic terrorism. Following a cyber attack that forced the shutdown of a major pipeline in the US East Coast, oil has gained 1%. The rise comes amid concerns about supply disruption. The White House said that it was working closely with Colonial Pipeline to help it recover from the ransomware attack, which forced the biggest US fuel pipeline operator to shut a network supplying populous eastern states. Afghanistan's President Ashraf Ghani ordered government forces to match a 3-day ceasefire following Taliban's announcement of ceasefire over Eid. The ceasefire comes after a deadly week in Afghanistan following a series of blasts in the country. NASA has criticized China for its failure to meet responsible standards regarding their space debris. This after the wreckage of Long March 5 rocket dropped into the Indian Ocean near the Maldives. Chad's military has claimed victory in its weeks-long battle with northern rebels. The battle led to the death of President Idris Deby on the battlefield. The rebel group has said they were not aware of an end to the fighting. In the latest scandal to hit the royal family, the Queen's cousin, Prince Michael of Kent, was reportedly willing to extract personal profit and favors from Russian President Vladimir Putin using his royal status. A baby minke whale has been rescued after being stranded in the River Thames in London. The baby whale, which measured between 3 and 4 meters long, was spotted just past 9 p.m. local time, and the rescue efforts took 4 hours. Rory McIlroy has ended his 18-month title drought on the PGA Tour by clinching the Wells Fargo Championship at Quail Hollow for the 3rd time. The 4-time major winner started the final round 2 shots off the pace, but carded a 3 under 68 to beat Mexican Abraham Ancer by 1 shot. Victory sees McIlroy return to the top 10 of the world rankings and puts him among the favorites for the US PGA Championship in 2 weeks' time. European football's governing body UEFA will decide by Wednesday whether the final of the Champions League will be moved from Istanbul to Wembley. The English clubs Manchester City and Chelsea are set to face off in the title clash on the 29th of May. But Turkey is on the UK's red list, and the government has told fans not to travel due to COVID-19 concerns. UEFA officials are in talks with the UK government about potentially shifting the venues.
One month and counting, India's second wave continues to kill. New daily infections remain well over 300,000. India's total pandemic caseload has crossed 22 million. In the last 24 hours, India reported more than 360,000 new cases. That's a dip from the previous days when daily infections had crossed the 400,000 mark. 4 lakh new infections per day. But that's hardly any relief, because testing has also gone down in India. On Sunday, India conducted 1.47 million tests. That's the lowest this month. The daily average earlier was 1.7 million tests. So the dip in cases could be a result of fewer tests. Right now, India has more than 3.7 million active cases. 3.7 million people are currently positive in India. More than 18 million people have recovered overall. What about those who did not? Daily deaths crossed the 4,000 mark recently. India's total fatalities are now close to 250,000. As for vaccination, the progress is slow. 10 days ago, India opened its vaccination drive to all adults, everyone above the age of 18. But so far, not even 3% of the population has been fully vaccinated. Less than 10% have got the first shot. And we do know that it's a huge population to cover, more than 1.3 billion people, which is why India must move faster. The problem is, we don't have enough vaccines to go around. Look at these figures. In April, India was administering 3.5 million shots per day, 3.5 million doses every day. That was the peak. Last week, the daily average dropped to 1.9 million shots. So between the 6th of April and the 6th of May, according to one report, daily inoculations in India have dropped by 38%. Over the weekend, the central government said states will get more than 5 million doses in the next 3 days. But with the kind of numbers that we have, India is barely scratching the surface. Guess who is trying to leverage the crisis in India? The home country of the Wuhan virus, China. Let's tell you what Beijing has been up to since India's second wave began. It called for a meeting of South Asian foreign ministers, the same one where China extended a last-minute invite to India. Delhi did not attend. China's intentions were clear. With India firefighting at home, China wanted to step into India's role as the chief vaccine supplier to the region. and it has been trying to do that, promising more doses to Afghanistan, to Bangladesh, to Nepal and to Sri Lanka. And that's not all. China has also sent aid to India, something that India did not ask for. Chinese aid, oxygen concentrators, ventilators, medical supplies have all come from China via the Red Cross. And the motive is not lost on anyone. This is not aid. This is China trying to portray itself as the savior after unleashing a pandemic on the world. Beijing may want the world to forget about its cover-up, but the past keeps catching up with them. And this time it has come in the form of a book. A book that reveals that what China has been doing with coronaviruses. The Chinese military was studying if these viruses, coronaviruses, can be used as a weapon in the future. And this was 5 years before the pandemic began. Chinese military scientists wrote a paper that predicted a third world war, a war where viruses will serve as a bioweapon. This report was published by The Australian. The journalist behind it has written a book on the origins of the pandemic, and this report is a teaser for that book. It only talks about the paper written by Chinese military scientists. What does it say? It says scientists from the PLA and senior public health officials wrote a paper. The paper said SARS coronaviruses, and I'm quoting, SARS coronaviruses are heralding a new era of genetic weapons. Weapons that can be artificially manipulated into a virus and later weaponized and unleashed in a way, quote unquote, never seen before. Remember, this was written 5 years ago, Chinese military predicting how coronaviruses can be used as weapons. You could say these are mere observations in a scientific paper, but remember, this is the Chinese military we're talking about. For the United States, these revelations were deeply disturbing. They found this document while investigating the origins of the virus. Even lawmakers in the United Kingdom and Australia are concerned. The chairman of the British and Australian Foreign Affairs and Intelligence Committees have issued a statement. And they say the Chinese paper raises major concerns about Beijing's lack of transparency over the origins of the Wuhan virus. These claims have essentially revived all sorts of theories around the Wuhan lab. And the claim that the virus has leaked from a laboratory. Now, let me be very clear here. This paper itself makes no mention of COVID-19 or what we call the Wuhan virus. It talks about coronaviruses in general, the large family of viruses ranging from common cold to SARS. And the Wuhan virus is only a part of this family of viruses. So far, there is no clear evidence that conclusively proves that the Wuhan virus leaked from a lab, accidentally or intentionally. But Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the World Health Organization, has not dismissed this lab theory. He wants more investigation into this angle. Even with his compromised credentials, he has not been able to dismiss the lab theory. So here's a question. Was China thinking about building a coronavirus weapon? Experts remain suspicious about Beijing's intentions. And this is the reason why. They are concerned about the high-risk nature of Chinese research into coronaviruses, especially the studies being conducted by scientists in Wuhan. The infamous Wuhan Institute of Virology was allegedly conducting what is called gain-of-function research. Now, what is that? What is gain-of-function? In this research, scientists create new viruses that could be more transmissible and lethal. In other words, they were creating new variants that spread and killed faster. Peter Jennings, the executive director of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, has raised a red flag. He believes that under President Xi Jinping, there is a growing collaboration between civilian researchers and the military in China. A collaboration that could potentially lead to weaponization of biological research, the kind that the Wuhan lab was allegedly conducting. So what does China have to say about these latest revelations? Beijing has deployed the state mouthpiece, the Global Times, to respond. It called this report an attempt to twist facts. Well, what else do you expect them to say? China continues to deny reports, browbeat critics, and whitewash evidence. But the lab theory is not going away. every new claim, every new revelation only adds more fuel to the fire. It keeps bringing us back to the same question. What is China trying to hide about the origins of this pandemic? Meanwhile, vaccine maker AstraZeneca is suffering one setback after another. Last year, before the global vaccine rollout, the world was betting big on the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. But now, one of the biggest buyers of this vaccine is dumping it. The European Union will not buy more vaccines from AstraZeneca beyond the current order that ends in June. Our next report tells you why Europe is dumping what was once called the most promising vaccine of this pandemic.
It was a troubled relationship from the word go. But now it is edging closer to a breakup. The European Union is turning away from AstraZeneca's Wuhan virus vaccine. The bloc had placed orders till June, and that's where it will end. Europe will not renew the deal with AstraZeneca. French President Emmanuel Macron says the EU has better options to consider.
Who could have known last autumn which vaccine would work or not? I think it was a good policy to buy as many vaccines with all the solutions possible, which most other countries and world powers have done. We had to buy mRNA, adenovirus, protein subunit, so we got everything that was available because no one knew what would work. We now have feedback. We use this vaccine in France and in Europe, and we must continue to do so because it will help us get out of this crisis. But to combat the variants on future orders, we see that other vaccines are more efficient. So this shows European pragmatism, which I am proud of.
The French president is talking about Pfizer. The EU recently struck a deal to buy more than 1 billion doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. When the pandemic began, the European Union was betting on the AstraZeneca shot to vaccinate more than 400 million citizens. But now it has switched to Pfizer.
I was glad that I could announce that we now concluded the negotiations with BioNTech Pfizer for a new contract. A new contract looking forward to the years 22 and 23. The new contract secures 1.8 billion doses of vaccines.
Needless to say, that's bad news for AstraZeneca, and only the latest in a string of setbacks. Denmark had already stopped using the shot after some patients developed rare blood clots. Since then, Europeans have either limited the use of this vaccine or stopped administering it altogether. Sweden donated its stockpile of 1 million AstraZeneca vaccines to COVAX. That's the WHO's program for equitable global access for vaccines. For AstraZeneca, the final blow came from Norway. Oslo, too, has suspended the use of this vaccine. But well before the cases of blood clots emerged, AstraZeneca and the European Union engaged in a public spat. The European leadership blamed the company for its slow vaccine rollout. It claimed that in the first 3 months of 2021, AstraZeneca delivered just 30 million shots out of the promised 90 million. In the second quarter, AstraZeneca could deliver only 70 million out of the promised 180 million doses. The tussle ultimately led to a raid by the Italian police on an AstraZeneca facility outside Rome. The European Union followed this up with a lawsuit against the company. What has happened in Europe could be the beginning of a storm for AstraZeneca. The United Kingdom has tweaked its advisory. British experts now say the shot shouldn't be given to people under 40 years of age. Canada, too, has limited use of the shot. Last week, an expert panel said that Pfizer and Moderna vaccines should be the go-to choice for Canada. When the AstraZeneca jab was rolled out, it was one of the world's most promising shots. because of its high efficacy and low prices. 6 months on, it is not the West's favorite shot. Blame it on pharma wars. Or rich countries being spoilt for choice. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
Now let's talk about vaccine hesitancy. What is it? It's basically the delay or refusal to take a vaccine. And it's more common than you would imagine. It is the biggest threat to the global rollout. Bigger than shortages and side effects. You just saw what's happening in Europe. And this is not something new. Vaccine hesitancy is as old as vaccines themselves. There is no single reason for it. In some places, hesitancy is based on religion. Elsewhere, it is politics. Whatever be the reason, the end result is never good. Look at some of the examples from history. These are all instances where vaccine hesitancy led to outbreaks. Stockholm, 1873. Vaccination rate dropped from 90% to 40%. It was triggered by a religious anti-vax campaign. Guess what happened the same year? A deadly smallpox epidemic. Here's another example, and this is from the UK and Ireland in the year 2000. People started linking the measles vaccine to autism. So vaccination rates dropped below 80%, and the result was this: 300 cases, 100 hospitalizations and 3 deaths, all of them preventable. The bottom line is this: vaccine hesitancy is dangerous, deadly in fact. The World Health Organization ranks it as one of the top 10 global health threats. So how do you beat this threat? Through proper messaging. And this messaging must come right from the top. Unfortunately, that's not happening. Think about the WHO. You would expect them to give facts and robust advice. Instead, we're getting confusion and conjecture. Let me show you what WHO chief scientist Soumya Swaminathan said on Saturday. She was talking about the Wuhan virus variant detected in India. Listen to what she said.
The one that was first identified in India, the B1617, is likely to be a variant of concern because it has some mutations which increase transmission and which also potentially could make them resistant to antibodies that are generated by vaccination or by natural infection.
Let me highlight a few things she said. B1617 is likely to be a variant of concern. It could potentially make them resistant to antibodies. Likely and potentially, two things you do not want a health expert to say, because this is in the realm of possibility. And don't get me wrong, future studies may very well prove her right. But why not wait for those studies? Why jump the gun? We ask this because words have consequences, especially when coming from the WHO's top scientist. She says the new variants may evade the vaccines. Now, there are a lot of people undecided on whether to get the shot, and those people may be swayed by such remarks. They may think, if the WHO says it's pointless, why take it at all? This is irresponsible, not to mention dangerous. When top officials make such careless remarks, it becomes our duty to set the record straight. So let me say this again. The vaccines are safe and effective. Variant or not, make sure you get the shot at the earliest, whenever your turn comes. And coming back to the variant, can it really dodge the vaccine? Last week, India's top medical body, the ICMR, published a study. It concluded that Bharat Biotech's Covaxin was effective against the double mutant. So was the WHO not aware of this study? Or did they choose to ignore it? Or do they disagree with it? And we're not waiting for the answers because we have been tracking the WHO's action since December 2019. And we can tell you that their messaging and their response has been botched up from the word go. December 2019 is when the World Health Organization got news of the virus in Wuhan. What did they do about it? Nothing for more than a month. It was on the 30th of January that Dr. Tedros finally declared a public health emergency. It took him another month to utter the word pandemic. A lot of harm was done during this time. Some countries banned travel with China. They were declared racist by the World Health Organization. Dr. Tedros called these bans an unnecessary interference. 1 year later, those countries stand vindicated. What about lockdowns? The WHO's envoy, David Nabarro, said lockdown should be the last resort. Today, this is true. because we have vaccines. But last year, this advice made no sense whatsoever. Lockdowns were humanity's first line of defense, a circuit breaker for countries to build up resources. But nothing compares to the WHO's advice on masks. Look at this headline, and I'm quoting, "Face masks could do more harm than good if used incorrectly." Now, this is a classic example of negative advice. Let me explain. The WHO is trying to ask people to wear their masks correctly, properly. But this statement does the very opposite. It scares them. What could they have done instead? Maybe a campaign video on how to wear masks correctly. This is Communication 101. Positive messages stick, negative ones do not. These are just a few instances where the WHO stumbled, when their messaging confused people. Unfortunately, it happened all the time last year. From masks to lockdowns to travel bans to now vaccines. The World Health Organization has been like a loose cannon, firing off assumptions and conjecture. You expect that from politicians, not from health experts. But then again, the WHO stopped being a health body in 2020. Japan, meanwhile, is counting down to one of the biggest and greatest sporting events in the world. I'm talking about the Olympics. The Games have rarely been cancelled or postponed in their history. Since 1896, the Olympics have been cancelled only 6 times. Last year, the pandemic forced Japan to postpone the Games. The Olympic torch was doused even before it could be lit. But as cases spike in Japan and public sentiments remain against the Games, are the Olympics heading for a record 7th cancellation?
Fake cheers, empty seats, and the growing sound of pounding feet. Welcome to the Wuhan virus era Olympics, one that Japan seems determined to hold at any and every cost. This is Tokyo's Showcase National Stadium, the front and center of Sunday's test event. The event brought home the reality of hosting a pandemic-era Olympics. Recorded noises reaching a crescendo as runners approached the finish line. But there was more noise outside the stadium. Over 100 protesters chanted and marched, calling for the Olympics to be cancelled.
No Olympics! No Olympics anywhere!
A poll found that nearly 60% of Japanese respondents want them to be scrapped, less than 3 months before the Games are due to open. While the public sentiment remains firm, mixed messages are pouring in from all sides. The International Olympic Committee, or the IOC, and the government of Japan cannot seem to decide on who is ultimately responsible for deciding the fate of the Games. Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga has always maintained that the Games will go on. But when the public opinion shifted, so did the Prime Minister's stance. He now says that the IOC has the final say, insisting that he has never put the Olympics first.
I've never put the Olympics first. My priority has been to protect the lives and health of the Japanese population. Let me address that clearly. In terms of the Olympic and Paralympic Games, it is important that we must first prevent the spread of the virus. The IOC has already made a decision to hold the Games and notified countries as such.
The organizers have so far remained unmoved. While the public sentiment remains a concern, the IOC says that the Games will go ahead as planned.
At the moment the Games will go ahead. There's no need for us to be hypothetical. We spent the first half of last year identifying all the worst case scenarios. We spent the next 6 months through to now looking at the countermeasures that are necessary. We're implementing those countermeasures. You've read the playbook.
Japan is witnessing a surge in infections. The Wuhan virus is taxing Japan's healthcare system. With only 2% of the country's population vaccinated, hospital beds are running out across the country. And a slow vaccine rollout has frustrated the population. Since winning the bid to host the Games in 2013, Japan has spent billions to get infrastructure ready. The cost for the Games has soared to a record $15.4 billion, up by almost $3 billion in the last year alone. If the Games are cancelled again, the losses will be staggering. With just 10 weeks to go, the countdown has already begun. The Olympic torch is travelling across Japan. Test events are taking place in stadiums, and athletes are taking their jabs. The IOC says that the Games are a beacon of hope. But will it be hope at a deadly cost? Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Jerusalem is a city under siege. And not for the first time. From stories in the Bible to United Nations resolution, this is a city forged in conflict. It has seen crusades. It has seen intifadas. And now, those fault lines have been ignited again. This is what Jerusalem looks like right now. The streets are crawling with Israeli police. Flashbangs are flying overhead and injured Palestinians are being rushed to hospitals. At least 300 protesters have been hospitalized. Some of them are in critical condition. This is Israel's worst crackdown in recent history. Some West Asian news outlets are hinting at a third intifada or uprising. So how exactly did things descend into chaos? Why are the Palestinians protesting? And what is the world saying about Israel's brutal crackdown? It all started with a Supreme Court hearing. The judgment was due today, but it's been postponed after the violence. What was the case about? In Jerusalem, it can only be about three things: religion, land, or a combination of both. This case centered around Sheikh Yarrah. It's a Palestinian settlement near Damascus Gate. And Damascus Gate is one of the main gates in the old city of Jerusalem. Now, today, the court was to decide whether this land should be given to Israeli settlers. And considering the past, the judgment was a foregone conclusion. In fact, some Israelis had already started moving in. Watch this.
Jacob, you know this is not your house.
Yes, but if I go, you don't go back. So what's the problem? Why are you yelling at me? I didn't do this. I didn't do this.
But
it's easy to yell at me, but I didn't do this.
You are stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it.
No one is allowed to steal it, يا عمي.
זה לא שלי להחזיר.
If I don't steal it, someone else will. You see what's happening there. This video went viral. Palestinians mobilized. They organized protests saying more evictions would soon follow. This was flashpoint number 1. Flashpoint number 2 started sometime in mid-April, the beginning of the holy month of Ramadan. Palestinians wanted to meet in the old city after breaking their fast, but Israeli police set up barriers. They prevented them from gathering. Why? No particular reason. Israel says they're maintaining order. But this was supposed to be a peaceful religious gathering. What's happened over the weekend? That's what happened over the weekend. But today things did go up a notch. Israeli officers unleashed a wave of violence on the protesters. And most of it was centered around the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Al-Aqsa is the third holiest site in Islam after Mecca and Medina. And these pictures are from earlier today. Palestinian protesters armed with stones. Israeli riot police with flashbangs and batons. It was a no contest. Hundreds of Palestinians were driven away by Israeli firing. In the background, you can see Al-Aqsa and its iconic dome. This is a mosque that has witnessed violence before. It is located on a hilltop, a controversial hilltop at that. The Jews call it Temple Mount, the holiest site in Judaism. The Muslims call it Noble Sanctuary, the third holiest site in Islam. The two religions have fought over it for years and they continue to do so. So coming back to the crackdown, why did it intensify today? because today is Jerusalem Day. On this day, Israel captured eastern Jerusalem. This was during the 1967 Arab-Israel War, the so-called Six-Day War. Israel won that war against all odds. And every year, Israel celebrates it with a march through the old city. Palestinians say it is a deliberate provocation. So today, security was beefed up. But in Jerusalem, security is offensive, which explains why the police stormed Al-Aqsa. And that too, in the holy month of Ramadan. Many of the protesters ended up fleeing inside the mosque. And these are some of the pictures they sent out. Israel's crackdown is not new. They have oppressed Palestinians, evicted them from their homes and moved into their neighborhoods. And none of this is sanctioned by international law. But Prime Minister Netanyahu says he will continue doing it.
This is not a mission that we can carry out without conflict from time to time with those same forces of intolerance that want to take away our rights. First of all, our rights, but not only ours, to the Temple Mount and the other holy sites. We are determined to ensure the rights of all, and this requires from time to time to stand up and stand strong as Israeli police and our security forces are doing now. We support them in this just struggle. These things, of course, have been incorrectly misrepresented in global media. In the end, the truth will prevail, but we must persist and say it.
The Prime Minister has made it clear the settlements will continue, so will the crackdown on Palestinians. But does he have the support for all of this? Globally, Israel stands isolated. The biggest setback came from Washington. Donald Trump, you see, largely ignored Israel's abuses in the West Bank, but Joe Biden has a different approach. Today, the State Department condemned the violence in Jerusalem. It asked Israeli officials to immediately de-escalate. So that's one big ally pulling out from Israel's corner. But then again, knowing America, it will not go the whole hog. It's Israel after all. What about the Islamic world? They have united against Israel, including the countries that have normalized ties with them. In Turkey, there were protests outside the Israeli consulate. Their president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is looking to capitalize on the issue. He has called Israel a terror state. Similar reactions have come from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain and Iran. Even the Pope has weighed in. He called for the multicultural identity of Jerusalem to be upheld. It's safe to say that Israel is alone in this battle, and frankly, that is not surprising. The United Nations says this crackdown could qualify as a crime against humanity. The European Union feels this makes a two-state solution even more difficult. So where do things go from here? There are three things to note. Number one, as bad as it looks right now, things could get even worse. The West Asian publications are right. This does have all the makings of a third intifada, and the violence could easily spiral beyond Jerusalem. From the Gaza Strip, operations have already started. Rockets and incendiary balloons have been intercepted. Chances are Israel will respond in kind to these attempts. Point number two to note. This is a setback to Israel's normalization efforts. Islamic countries have mobilized against them, and any hope that they had of signing a deal with Saudi Arabia has disappeared, at least for now. On the flip side, this has injected new momentum to the Palestinian cause. For a while, it seemed like Arab nations were abandoning Palestine. But this has brought the focus back on them. How the fragmented leadership steers this focus is a different question altogether. And point number three. More trouble for Netanyahu. He has lost his mandate to form the government. So this could be the parting blow from a defiant leader. He wants to push a hardline image. But in the process, he has lost international allies and made no gains in domestic politics. 4 elections in 2 years, and Netanyahu failed to form a government. His position is becoming increasingly untenable. So that's how things stand right now in Jerusalem, a city teetering on the edge. But betting against Jerusalem is never a good idea. This is a city that's been destroyed twice, besieged 23 times, recaptured 44 times, attacked 52 times. This is a city that knows how to recover. This is also a city that remembers its attackers. This time, they're not knights from the West, but men in riot gear with batons for swords. Now, French President Emmanuel Macron may be facing a rebellion from his military, in fact. Last month, more than 1,000 military personnel wrote a letter. They claim that France is headed towards a civil war. The military came down hard on these officers. But now serving officers have written another letter and they accuse the Macron government of silencing their warnings. Curiously, these letters come just before months before the presidential election. Here's a report.
It's rare for serving military officers to criticize a civilian government openly in a democracy. But French President Emmanuel Macron has now suffered this humiliation twice. Right-wing magazine Valeurs Actuelles has published yet another open letter from dissenting soldiers. It accuses Macron of cowardice, deceit and perversion. No one knows who is behind the letter. The magazine says it was signed by active military personnel anonymously. It appears with a petition that has more than 130,000 signatures from the public. What made these soldiers take such a radical step? Apparently, the issue of radical Islam. The letter claims the French government gave concessions to Islamism, and now the survival of France is at stake. Just like the last time, the French government has condemned this letter too. The last one came in April. About 1,000 servicemen and women, including some 20 retired generals, had signed a similar letter which warned of a deadly civil war and raised the threat of a coup. The second letter is more shrill in its tone. It's an all-out attack on the Macron government, accusing it of sullying the reputation of veterans and trampling on their honor. The criticism has been scathing. It is also political. The French right wing has been breathing life into these claims. Soon after the last letter came out, far-right leader Marine Le Pen spoke in support of the soldiers who had signed it. She called on them to support her politics and back her bid for the French presidency in 2022. But Le Pen was forced to go into damage control mode when the press quizzed her for backing soldiers who had threatened a coup. Le Pen is yet to comment on the second letter, but it plays right into the hands of the far right. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Let me tell you a story about Thomas Jefferson. He's one of America's founding fathers. American politicians love talking about them. The words of Jefferson and company are like the gospel truth. But how sincere is their devotion? Let's find out. This is what Jefferson said about the American Constitution, and I'm quoting, "Every constitution then and every law naturally expires at the end of 19 years. If it be enforced longer, it is an act of force and not of right." Let me simplify that for you. Jefferson believed that laws have an expiry date. A law that works today may not work in the future, and it's obvious why, because society changes. But if laws do not change with society, it can be disastrous. The United States is learning this the hard way. We are talking about the Second Amendment to the US Constitution, the one that deals with gun rights. This law is obsolete, and there are no two ways about it. We got further evidence of this over the weekend. 2 separate mass shooting incidents, one in New York at Times Square of all places, and another in Colorado. We'll tell you what happened in New York first. A scuffle broke out at Times Square. Around 4 people were involved. We do not know what they were arguing about, but things went south soon. One of them took out his gun and fired. He hit 3 people, and all of them innocent bystanders. Among them was a 4-year-old girl. Thankfully, the shooting was not fatal, but it reveals a worrying trend in New York. Mass shootings are becoming all too common. Even police officers are appealing for legal changes.
How many kids have to be shot before we take this seriously? We just had a 1-year-old homicide cleared this week. How many more kids do we need to be shot before we realize that bad policies have consequences? And we need action, and we need policies regarding laws to have consequences for the arrest.
American cops should be the last ones commenting on justice, but the commissioner has a point there. This is the direct result of bad laws. In some American states, you can buy guns at a Walmart. It's a system set up for mass shootings, and that's exactly what happened in Colorado. There was a shooting at a birthday party. The gunman killed 6 people and turned the gun on himself. One of the victims was his girlfriend. The police are still trying to determine his motive, but the attack has put Colorado on edge. This is the latest in a series of shooting incidents there. So we looked into Colorado's gun laws, and this is what we found. You can carry guns in state parks. You can carry guns in restaurants, and you do not have to tell police officers that you're carrying a firearm. These are not gun laws. These are the lack of gun laws. New York and Colorado caught all the headlines, but they were not the only incidents this weekend. There were at least 9 other mass shootings. There was one in Phoenix, in Maryland, California, Milwaukee, and Missouri. Put together, they claimed 15 lives in 2 days. This is the untold genocide in the United States. Just look at these numbers. 417 mass shootings in 2019, 600 in 2020. This is in the middle of the pandemic and lockdowns. 600 mass shootings. What about this year? 147 so far, and that number is rising every day. Is there a way out for America? Of course there is. The United States accounts for more than half of all gun violence deaths. If the rest of us can figure it out, why can't the US? Because in America, guns are political. They are marketed as a symbol of freedom. Gun lobbies are among the strongest in Washington. The biggest of them is the NRA, the National Rifle Association, NRA. In 2018, they topped 5 million members. And that's a huge vote bank right there, 5 million. So politicians always end up being soft on gun control, and Joe Biden is no different. He is proposing a range of measures, including background checks and a ban on automatic weapons. But there's a rider to this promise. President Joe Biden says these reforms will not affect the Second Amendment. And this is where the problem lies. American politicians think the Second Amendment is some heavenly command. In reality, it is an outdated law that is killing Americans every day. Accepting this is the first step to gun control in the US. But the question is, how many more shootings before this realization dawns on them? Even the world's highest peak is not safe from the spread of the Wuhan virus. Cases are on the rise at the Everest base camp. And the situation is so alarming that China is drawing lines on the Everest summit, trying to protect its own climbers. Meanwhile, Nepal is appealing to climbers to bring back their oxygen tanks as the Himalayan nation grapples with oxygen shortage. Our next report tells you more.
China has no regard for borders. Over the years, it has unilaterally changed them, following a line suitable only to Beijing. But when it comes to enforcing its own, China will go to any limits, even drawing a separation line on the peak of Mount Everest. Mount Everest straddles the China-Nepal border, with the northern slope falling in Tibet. The border runs across its summit point. The summit itself is a tiny and inhospitable area, almost the size of a small dining table. The peak is a small mound of snow, with barely enough space for a dozen climbers. So, how will China enforce this line? According to state media, it will be with the help of Tibetan guides. They will ascend Mount Everest and set up the line, stopping any contact between mountaineers from both sides. It's still unclear what this line will look like and if the guides will be physically present to enforce it. It is also not known whether they will remain in the death zone, where many lives have been lost due to a dearth of oxygen. But it is not just the summit that lacks oxygen. The Himalayan nation, too, is running out of it. In fact, it is so short of canisters that it wants Everest climbers to bring back their empties. Everest climbers usually carry oxygen tanks on their climb. They then abandon them during the expedition. They are often discarded during the descent. These cylinders then get buried in avalanches or are found abandoned on the mountain slopes. This year, Nepal issued climbing permits to over 700 climbers, a bid to get the mountaineering industry back up and running. They are estimated to have carried at least 3,500 oxygen bottles, tanks that can be refilled and used for Wuhan virus patients. The plea comes as Nepal's healthcare remains on the brink. Cases are skyrocketing across the nation. Hospitals and clinics remain overwhelmed, and the country's prime minister is pleading for help. Nepal has a shortage of around 25,000 oxygen cylinders. Hospitals are turning patients away. There's not enough oxygen to meet demands, and the shortage is fueling a growing crisis. Many now want the climbing season to end. Others are calling for the empties to be brought back. Urgent pleas are being made to climbers and guides as the Himalayan nation gasps for oxygen. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching. Stay safe.